So today was the day that H.R. 1, that we're going to do the big rollout, right? H.R. 1, the first bill that the first House Resolution 1, this was going to be the first piece of legislation that the Democrats roll out. This involves all sorts of voting reforms, motor voter registration, campaign finance, matching funds, anti-corruption measures. A great piece of legislation that was not going to get passed in the Senate. In fact, Mitch McConnell has said he will not even put it up for a vote. But the value of this is basically to stick a flag in the ground, as it were, and say, this is what we intend to do the day that we take the Senate. It is an attempt to restore the protections under the Voting Rights Act. It is looking to restore voting rights for formerly incarcerated. It supports the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. There's redistricting reform. Unfair purging of the voter rolls stopped. Modernization and some type of consistency in voting across the country. There's a lot of very positive things in this bill. And Mitch McConnell, part because I think K Street is obviously super upset about this because it deals with lobbying and ethics overhauls as well. Mitch McConnell announces that the bill's not even going to get a vote in the Senate. And the reason why you're not going to hear that much about that story today is because, A, the press is pretty bad at covering Mitch McConnell. But B, Democrats are not spending the past 3 or 4 days or week, frankly, building up to this moment and hammering the Republicans over this. They're not gaining the advantage of publicizing how Republicans want to suppress the vote. The part of this bill also makes it a federal holiday for federal workers so that they can go vote. This voting reforms should have been a marquee package. That's all that we should be hearing about, particularly in the past couple of days. It's been a slow news days. However, they're not, because the Democratic leadership buckled. Maybe buckled is the wrong word, but has been insistent upon writing up a censure bill, essentially, to censure Ilhan Omar because of statements that she didn't even make or statements that they have mischaracterized. And we touched on this the other day, and I wasn't going to bring it up again, but we got an email addressed to us in response to the thing that we talked about with Barry Weiss, who was commenting on this on The View. Okay? And put Barry Weiss aside, all right? She is...
Gladly.
But honestly...
She is my black swan, and I do not like her.
Right. Put her aside, because she's really a sideshow to this. This emailer writes that he agrees with us that claiming that criticism of Israel, much like criticism of France, cannot be considered inherently anti-Semitic. On this, I agree with you entirely. The problem with this offering, the emailer writes, offering this as a response is that on not one of these 3 occasions that Ilhan Omar has been publicly censured for alleged anti-Semitism has she criticized a specific policy or conduct of the Israeli government. Instead of delving into the actual detail of where U.S. policy has gone wrong vis-a-vis the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, she chooses instead to peddle in anti-Semitic tropes about Israel's supporters in the U.S. be it invoking the image of Jewish money being nefariously used to control American politics with their AIPAC statements, or accusing Israel supporters of dual, this is a quote, dual allegiances or dual loyalty. I want you to note those two, everything that's been said there. The emailer writes, to be clear, it's possible to level legitimate criticism of the Israel lobby without falling into anti-Semitic thinking. However, that requires understanding the Israel lobby for what it really is, which is a loosely connected, often competing group of organizations across which wide ranges of spectrum of opinion on what Israel ought to be doing, what the U.S. policy towards Israel ought to be. It requires actual specific issues with what these organizations do, then rather than attempting to delegitimize support for Israel as reasonable in a democracy. He goes on to say, if you actively criticize AIPAC, you'd have no disagreement from people like me or Barry Weiss. Well, put aside Barry Weiss because I think you're wrong about that. But totally wrong. But that's not the point.
Her dad's in AIPAC.
Like I say, I don't want to get caught up in that. In summary on this specific point, while criticism of Israel is by no means inherently anti-Semitic, full disclosure, I've actually been to the West Bank and participated in activism with the goal of ending the occupation. That doesn't mean it can never be. Goes on to say, you begin applying old anti-Semitic ideas that were previously leveled at individual Jews, for example, using money to control the world, and just transfer the target from the Jew to the Jewish state, you're getting to very tricky territory. All right, so let me show you how this guy has moved the ball in the same way that critics of Ilhan Omar have. Okay? Because Ilhan Omar was not criticizing even Israel in these statements. She was criticizing the fact that she is unable to criticize Israel without being attacked. And she is criticizing the fact that Congress would take up a bill that would punish people for supporting protests against Israel. She never, ever, ever uses the words, quote, dual allegiances or, quote, dual loyalty. And to the extent that she talks about anybody having loyalty to another country, she is criticizing not Jews, she's criticizing members of Congress. Let's listen to what one of the things that she said. Now, we know the exchange on Twitter where she's asking like why people are voting on behalf of AIPAC, and she says because of the money, which is exactly what Thomas Friedman said. Exactly. Although Thomas Friedman, to be fair, was far more explicit.
Yeah, and he also said people in non-electoral roles as well.
Yes.
He was explicit and broader.
He was explicit and broader. But let's listen to what Ilhan Omar said that supposedly involves. Well, first off, let's listen to this. This exchange here is on. Where is this exchange?
I-24.
On I-24, where the debate is happening as to what Ilhan Omar does. And this woman here, I don't know who it is.
She's on Fox News a bunch.
Okay, some Fox News person does exactly what the emailer does.
We're allowed to talk about the gun lobby, that we're allowed to talk about the oil lobby and the fossil fuel lobby, but only the Israel lobby we're not allowed to talk about. It's completely and utterly absurd.
That's absolutely not true. She attacked American Jews.
Ilhan, for example, calls for a boycott of Saudi Arabia. Does that mean she's anti-Muslim?
To this nation. That is not true, and I will have my say.
She never said anything about American Jews having dual loyalty. You are making this up. I mean, just have the decency. Can you cite it? When did she say that Jews have dual loyalty to the U.S.? When did she say that?
She said she questions citizens
who
have
you to
dual
produce
loyalty
a single
to the
fact
United
that she made that reference.
She said
what did she say?
She said that she challenges those citizens who have dual loyalty and conflicted loyalty to the United States.
That is utterly, utterly ridiculous. She has never made that comment.
Okay, so she didn't use the word citizens. She didn't use the word dual loyalty. Listen to this.
And what I am fearful of is that because Rashida and I are Muslim, that a lot of our Jewish colleagues, a lot of our constituents, a lot of our allies go to thinking that everything we say about Israel to be an anti-Semitic because we are Muslim. And so to me, it's something that becomes designed to end the debate. Because you get in this space of, yes, right? Like, I know what intolerance looks like, and I'm sensitive when someone says the words you use, Ilhan, are resemblance of intolerance. And I am cautious of that, and I feel pained by that. But it almost as if every single time we say something, regardless of what it is we say, that is supposed to be about foreign policy, our engagement, our advocacy about ending oppression, or the freeing of every human life and wanting dignity, we get to be labeled in something, and that ends the discussion because we end up defending that, and nobody ever gets to have the broader debate of what is happening with Palestine.
Okay, so here she's just simply talking about the fact that she is subject to critiques because she is Muslim. And she is automatically considered suspect. Do we have the other clip where she talks about, specifically where she talks about people being loyal to the other country? I don't think she said that in there, did she?
I think my understanding is that that's the clip that they're extrapolating that from.
She doesn't say about another loyalty, does she?
That's certainly not what I heard.
No, there's another one, I think, where she said, but she never uses the word dual loyalty. She never uses the word that in regards to Jews.
No,
I know where the exchange is. I think that was written, actually. Hold on for a second. Paul Waldman has written very well about this, actually. And she said, okay, I should not be expected to have allegiance, pledge support to a foreign country in order to serve my country in Congress or serve on my committee. So she's not referring to Jews having that. She's saying that I should not be expected to have that. She's not even she's referring to Congress people. She's referring to herself as a congressperson. Here it is. Here is the tweet. Our democracy is built on debate, Congresswoman. She's responding to Nita Lowey. I should not be expected to have allegiance / pledge support to a foreign country in order to serve my country in Congress or serve on committee. The people of the 5th elected me to serve their interests. I'm sure we agree on that. She's not implying that Jews have this dual allegiance because, let's face it, as Paul Waldman points out, for decades now, the vast majority of Jews in this country are critical of Israel. That the most amount of support in terms of citizenry in this country comes from Christian evangelicals.
Yeah, and plenty of Jews in Israel are also critical
That's
of
true.
Israel.
But in the context of Americans, she's not even talking about actual citizens or average citizens. She's talking about Congress people. And when she talks about signing a pledge, how many people listening to me now, and this emailer who has emailed me, is from Britain, are aware that in half the states in this country, you must sign a pledge if you are getting a contract with the state that you will not participate in a protest against Israel. This is not a joke. There was a lawsuit that was brought by a Texas woman who provides speech pathology services to the school, and she had to sign a pledge in Texas that she would not participate in BDS if she was going to take this job. There is a, where was it? In Arkansas.
Small town newspaper.
The very Jewish-oriented state of Arkansas.
The Little Rock's Arkansas Times. The owner, Alan Leverett. I don't know if Leverett is Jewish or not. But the University of Arkansas Pulaski Technical College would not advertise in the Arkansas Times unless Leverett signed a pledge that his business does not boycott Israel. Now, Leverett does not boycott Israel, but he considers a state law that forces him to pledge not to boycott Israel unconstitutional. That's what she's referring to. And we mentioned that the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot because they're not talking about H.R. 1 this week. Well, S.R. 1 was a bill brought up in the Senate to federalize this ban so that it's not just the 27 states, it is the entire country. You cannot have a contract with the federal government unless you pledge not to boycott Israel. I mean, this is bizarre.
Well, it's an actual assault on free speech in
it
the
is
actual world.
a dramatic assault on free speech.
It kind of makes me think that BDS might actually work on some level.
Let's put that aside because that's wholly irrelevant. The effectiveness of it, whether people are supported or not, the idea that you would have to pledge to not protest a foreign country, or this country for that matter, or anything for that matter, is absurd. And when she calls that out, she is smeared as saying that Jews have a dual loyalty to their country. No, she's saying I shouldn't be forced as a member of Congress. And frankly, none of the citizens in the country should be forced to pledge allegiance to not protesting against Israel. I mean, regardless of whether you think there is a comparison or not with South Africa, the idea that people would have been, that you could not do business with the federal or state government if you protested against South Africa 30 some odd years ago would be laughed out of the room, particularly by Democrats. So at the expense of a marquee bill, the Democrats decided to bring up this, essentially to codify this smear against one of their, frankly, rising stars. And it's incredibly disingenuous. And I will add this, that I took this critique from this email, even though it was doing exactly what the smear is. She never says dual allegiances, quote, unquote. She never says dual loyalty, quote, unquote. She never's talking about Jews. She's talking about congresspeople and herself being expected to do this. She doesn't talk about Jews whatsoever. In fact, Jews, that smear of Jews that they had dual loyalty is silly in the context of modern America because 75% of Jews in this country critique Israel. And beyond that, I will say, I'm going pretty far down the road by taking this seriously because it was just reported 3 days ago, maybe it was last week, that former Mossad agents form private security firms that harass people who support BDS. And I can tell you from my
fake
own
stories
experience,
and harass.
Yeah, I can tell you from my own experience that in 2004, when Janine and I would critique Israel on the original Majority Report on Air America, the next day, we were contacted by the Israeli embassy. And we're basically told, oh, we're going to send, I think it was Pincus at the time was the ambassador. We had the ambassador on a couple of times. So this type of stuff, and I said it yesterday and I will repeat it again, this is the greatest existential threat to Israel, in my opinion, because the days of pretending that Israel is not problematic and ignoring it and doing stuff like this is going to isolate Israel. It may take 5 or 10 years, but the tide has turned, and largely because of the actions of Israel. And I would say because of the right in this country. Because if you stifle debate in this way, You're doing a disservice to Israel. And I say this as someone who is a supporter of Israel. You're doing a disservice to Israel. You're basically saying like, you know what? They've had a lot to drink, but you just don't, just let them drive. Let them drive. That's basically what's happening.
I also just, can I broaden it a bit?
Yeah.
Everything is 100% on point. But I think that also, you know, in addition to her courage on Israel, and also, by the way, this is ridiculous to have to do, but this is somebody who said it as an example that the Hajj should be boycotted because of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, which is an extraordinary position of a Muslim to hold. She's also been obviously opposed to a coup in Venezuela, and what she did to Elliot Abrams seriously pissed a lot of people off. And I think the real dangerous play here, and this is, I'll bring Barry Weiss up, not to bring her up, but Barry Weiss in that clip yesterday said she's on the Foreign Relations Committee. And Steve Scalise, David Duke, without the baggage, which I know we'll get to, is getting at this as well. So in addition to the disgusting, craven display of Democratic leadership to even consider throwing her under the bus like this, and also just the pure disingenuousness. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, is the only quarter that I would give on this is like, if somebody had a genuine concern about this, you could easily have this conversation with her privately, which frankly I think in general is a better thing to do with allies, period, across the board with regards to these things. But the real aim here is to get her off of the Foreign Relations Committee because she represents more broadly a courageous and different voice.
Right, yeah, and not just in regards to Israel.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I just said. Latin America, Saudi Arabia, across the board. I mean, she is somebody saying something different here. And then you add this to the context of the levels of incitement in this country, where simultaneously you're completely underplaying the fact that, as an example, there was a terrorist attack against Jews a couple of months ago by a deranged right-winger. And I don't even want to put out into the atmosphere, God knows the types of threats that Ilhan Omar is facing. And leaders in her party are not unequivocally condemning it and protecting her as both a political threat, maybe even a physical threat. And I have to say, like, you know, I did this more last night, but I'll just do one sentence. Like, AOC is prevaricating, and there's no room for prevarication. She needs complete, utter, no BS protection. This is disgusting and dangerous.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. She needs to stand up for her colleague and comrade. Also, I'm sure all of the free speech warriors in the intellectual dark web are rushing to condemn this literal restriction on freedom of speech.
I might need to read more about that, but YouTube demonetization.
Listen to, specifically to get onto the point as to why they want Ilhan Omar off of the Foreign Services Committee. Here is a guy who literally introduced himself to a some type of Elks Club. I can't remember exactly what the context was when he was out running for election the first time as David Duke without the baggage. Now, I suppose there's a good interpretation of that someone somewhere has the imagination to come up with. I, for one, can't. Maybe there was other things that David Duke was involved in. Was it like financial chicanery, maybe?
Yes, I don't know, being on an all-meat diet.
Right. But here is Steve Scalise. This is the height of disingenuousness, but I don't, this I expect. This I expect. But the idea of Democrats echoing this unabashed racist line of thinking, and this idea that somehow, here he is accusing her of dual loyalties, right? And go ahead.
Well, the resolution only addresses a piece of the problem. She continues to display anti-Semitic remarks, comments. These are her beliefs. And so if they really are serious about addressing the problem, Nancy Pelosi has to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee. She's literally getting intelligence briefings on foreign policy of the United States, including our relationship with Israel, as she makes these kind of comments where she thinks any support of Israel is denouncing your own nationality. Where does that come from? It's a deep-rooted belief that shows the core of her convictions. And again, everybody's entitled to their own beliefs, but why would you have her on a committee that important, that sensitive to our foreign policy, if she has those kind of anti-Semitic beliefs, unless you're willing to tolerate it, and it shouldn't be tolerated. She ought to be removed immediately from the Foreign Affairs Committee.
The response by Nancy Pelosi to Steve Scalise is, "You've got to be joking." That's the only legitimate response to that guy. You've got to be joking. Because he's got to be joking.
Guy who runs on a overt white supremacy message is put. And again, this is incitement. And I don't throw those terms around. Like I've been, I'm someone who's critical, I think, of people on the left for going to that too quickly in a fair amount of cases, particularly online. But like that literally, if you couple that with the atmosphere and increase of hate crimes in this country, the West Virginia travesty with her and the 9/11 poster, this guy is, what's he implying by that? He's saying this is a Muslim woman who's getting intelligence briefings. The clear implication is some Frank Gaffney nut conspiracy that what is she passing intelligence
Of
to
course.
somebody?
Giving it to Al-Shabaab.
Of course.
That's what he's doing. He's inciting it right there.
And I think the idea of this is, of course, this is one of the ways that they hope to run, and this is one of the ways that they hope to sort of get the Democrats off message. And frankly, it's worked. And Nancy Pelosi should get a grip, and frankly, censure those members of her caucus who go out and smear a fellow member of the caucus.
Make a list.
Yeah, well, Democrats get money from AIPAC too, right?
Yeah, and I don't think it's just
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like Bernie and AOC need to be brave in this instance, like they are in other ones, and they're kind of disappointing me right now.